So welcome. This is Dr. Charlie Cartwright, and I'm here with my co-host, Julie Ruska, and we're having an outstanding conversation about race relations and just how to make things better in the country and bring us all together. And just so excited to share the camera with you today, Julie.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to kind of peel back the layers one at a time and raising awareness and expanding people's awareness of race issues and what's going on in the world right now and how we can be more constructive, focusing on solutions moving forward.
I love that. So I think to pick up where we left off in our previous conversation, how do people initiate the conversation? How do they get it started? And so I'm going to give my perspective, which I think is important, and then I'd like to hear yours as well. So for
Absolutely.
me, I've learned that you really have to be patient, give people some room to breathe and let them express themselves because their feelings are their feelings. And if we don't allow people to express their feelings, then those feelings are going to remain. So we're talking about conversations, not confrontations. And that's a big key point. So recently, I'm a big gamer. And so when I have time, late at night, I'm on the Xbox playing video games. And my favorite video game of all time is a game called Halo. And it's, we're fighting aliens and they came and tried to take over the Earth. Well, actually, they did take over the Earth, but we're in other planets. So you're a space marine in this game, and so I like the game. And then they came out with Halo Wars, and so then that's more of a strategy game. However, so I have a friend out of St. Louis, great guy. We actually met online and have become great friends, and he's out of St. Louis, and so we're playing 3 versus 3 this one night. He said, well, I want to bring a third in. I got a buddy. So his buddy's out east. So, and again, we can't see each other. We can hear each other and we're playing the game.
Yeah.
And so my friend from St. Louis, his name's Nate. Nate says, well, hey, what do you guys think about all this rioting and everything that's going on right now? So the other gentleman jumps in and says, well, hey, here's my problem with black people. This is what he's talking about. Here's my problem with black people. And so he starts using the terms, they do this. Now, he never used any racial slurs, nothing like that. He's just like, well, hey, they do this. I think it's a part of their culture, and they do this. I think it's part of their culture, and they do this. He named 4 or 5 things that he was frustrated about, right? And so then my buddy Nate says, well, hey, Charlie's one of my African-American friends. So Charlie, what do you think about that?
And I imagine he was like,
oh yeah, I'm sure he was. And I was like, well, hey, I appreciate your thoughts. And those are valid points you made. And I said, everything you frustrated about, everything you said, I'm frustrated with that too. Okay, so it's not like the things, he didn't say anything that wasn't true. I said, however, let me explain to you why some of those things may be the case. So you're a little boy, you're born into a family. And so now you're in the 3rd or let's say or 4th generation of a dysfunctional family. Okay, you're a kid, you don't know anything about it. That's all you know. The next door neighbor is dysfunctional. The neighbor on the other side is dysfunctional. The neighbor that lives behind you is dysfunctional. And the people across the street are dysfunctional. What chance do you have to not come up with a certain level of dysfunction?
Right.
That's a fact. So we've got to understand that and somehow be able to start to dissipate the level of dysfunction that currently exists in the African American community. It's just a fact. So, and we're not going to be able to go one block at a time or one city at a time. It's got to be one child at a time. And it's going to take all of us. All of us.
Yeah. So what do you feel is like, we're all about opening the conversation. What do you feel needs to shift from that perspective, like as adults? Because I am a former elementary school teacher. I feel like at that level with children, we are trying to teach more emotional intelligence. We're trying to do all of these things. There are a lot of programs. There's so many possibilities out there to help children, but we are facing now all of these adults who, regardless of what kind of family they grew up in, whatever, these issues are here. And so now what, right? Like, how do we as adults begin to open our awareness and talk about solutions in a constructive way where it's not they, because they, whether it's talking about Black people, they, white people, they, Hispanic people, whoever it is, when we do that, we're generalizing. Already we're stereotyping. And it might be a good, positive, or a negative, but anytime you talk about people categorically, it's incorrect. So how do we even address that?
Yeah, so I think just to take the initiative, right, to have conversations. Hey, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Or whether we're in the store or we're at a ball game, engaging with people that we don't know that are African American or white, engaging with them,
Yeah.
right? Just having the engagement, and then conversations start to happen naturally over time with those engagements. I mean, you're not going to solve the issue at a grocery store standing in line.
Right.
However, opening up dialogue with people in your area or people that you come across in the workplace, in the workspace, then the dialogue is going to start to occur naturally. And then from my standpoint, it's just important that when someone reaches out, when someone tries to engage, that they're allowed to engage. And even if they make mistakes, they're not punished for saying the wrong thing. Because I know people that, and I'm talking about educated, you know, Black people that are just waiting for somebody to say the wrong thing so they can just absolutely pounce on them. And
Right.
it's just so counterproductive.
Right, because then, like, I've had situations where I might have said the wrong thing and someone's pounced on me, and then I feel bad. I feel ashamed, but then I also don't want to further engage because it's like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be offensive. And then it's like, now it's over. Like, there's no place to go from there. So what's a more constructive way? Because I feel like, and this gets to another issue away from conversation, but to an issue of division, in the fact that after all of these years since like the civil rights movement and all of that, we still see very divided communities. We still see mostly Black people here, mostly white people here. What do you think that's all about, and how do we change that? Because the sports world has done a great job with it. But if you look at the just a regular, you go to a restaurant, right?
A
There's
church,
not
a
a lot
church,
of what?
a church.
A church, right? Right?
Right?
You go to church, and it's like, church and that's going to get into a religious issue. We're stepping on all these little minefields right now, Dr. Charlie. But right, you go to church, and my pastor, I watched him kind of step all around the issue one time about diversity, and he had a good heart. He was coming from a good place, but it was like, you know, look at who sits at your dinner table. Look at when you go out to eat, who are you going out to eat with? And he started bringing up some things. And I saw something recently on LinkedIn. A woman said, hey, your company has a diversity policy. Show me your board of directors. And that's where we start to see it, right? Like, people claiming they're open, they're accepting, they're all about diversity, but how do they live? Let's look at their Facebook when they're just hanging out on the weekends, and like, let's look at that. And how do we start to bridge that?
Yeah, and again, these are complex issues,
Right.
and it's just taking steps, baby steps, before we can really start to take large strides. And we got to walk before we can run, for sure.
Yeah.
But back to that conversation I was telling you I had online. So I was explaining some things and giving the gentleman perspective, and he's like, I hadn't thought about that. Or I can see where that is. And so we had a good conversation. So the next night I got on again, and I mean, he was waiting, say, hey, I thought about our conversation all day. I said, I did not want to offend you. I said, no, I was not offended at all, because those are your real feelings and that was your perspective. And when I was talking about my background, we had some similarities in how we grew up and how we were raised. And so he could really see, okay, this is how I feel about that. And
Right.
so, and so again, we started out here,
Mhm.
now we're here.
Right.
But I didn't, he wasn't disrespectful and I wasn't disrespectful. We're just having a conversation. It was pretty awesome. So, and I think that it's just, we have to exercise patience in all this. I know everybody would like everything just to fix
Right.
itself, because we have a society that we want to take a pill for this. We want instant
Yes.
things and fast food and all those
Right.
things. But when we're talking about deep issues, this is going to take patience and persistence,
Right.
right?
But I love what you were saying about that, like one conversation at a time. And I kind of see that with friendships too, like one friendship at a time. And to be willing to open your eyes. And I don't want people to, like, I don't want people to take away from this conversation. I'm saying, like, go out and purposely seek a friendship because they're from a different race. But it's just even having the awareness of who are the people that you're surrounding yourself with, who are your colleagues, who are your friends, who do you hang out with on weekends, like just even starting to look at that and go, why isn't there more diversity here? Why? Just asking yourself that question.
Yeah. And those
Because you can't have the conversation if you don't have if you don't have people to have the conversation with.
right. And just the creation of the dialogue is so huge, because now when two people have a great dialogue, they both come away with a new perspective. So I had a gentleman, a real good friend. His name is Rich Rita. He's a producer for a really large insurance brokerage firm, and he grew up. Uh, his family did well, right? So he grew up in wealthy circumstances, so university, fraternity, country club, and but he's very, very well-rounded individual. And we were having coffee a couple of weeks ago, and he says, Charlie, I just don't know what the solution is. And I was like, here's the solution. We're talking, right? And so we had this conversation. He's asking questions, giving feedback, and vice versa. I said, well, when we go our separate ways, I said, you're going to go back to your people and you're going to have a conversation with them. And when something comes up, you're like, wait a minute, no, I was talking to Dr. Charlie and he said this. Oh, and so now he's in those circles and he can incorporate what he's learned and what he knows, and it spreads. So now people say, well, hey, there's this Dr. Charlie. Well, who knows? Maybe they'll Google me and look
Yeah.
up and see some of my things and or my videos or my posts and say, hey, this is changing my perspective on some things. And so that's that, because it takes time. It takes time. But and then of course he'll say things, and I know he's an aristocrat, right? So then someone says, well, these rich white people, that's not really true. Okay, let me tell you
Right.
about my friend. Okay, so it creates the dialogue that way. I had made a post, a video a couple of weeks ago. I just felt like I had to speak out on my experience, and hopefully it helps some people. And so I made about a 5-minute video about the incident in Minneapolis and some things, and it really did well, and a lot of positive feedback on Facebook. And then I posted it to my LinkedIn and whatnot. Well, just 2 days ago, I got a call from a gentleman I grew up with, African American. He said, hey, I've been waiting a couple of weeks to talk to you. He said, I follow your stuff. You do such great work. He said, that video you made, I don't agree with you. I don't agree. And so he was telling me about his experiences growing up, which were somewhat different than mine, as he got older, actually, with the police and things like that. So he was explaining. We had a great conversation, and he didn't agree with everything that I said, but he can understand where I was coming from and where I am coming from, and I can understand where he's coming from. super smart guy, super successful, CPA, educated. He's not prejudiced. So, but we had a great conversation. He's like, we need to keep talking. We need to keep talking,
Yes.
because we would say something. I'd say, well, hey, here's what the data says on here. Here's where I get this from. The data doesn't support that. Okay, I can see that. Or so it was just a great back and forth. And so his feelings are valid. His experience is his experience. And so,
Of
but
course.
so are mine, and so are mine, and so are you.
Yes.
And so
Right.
that's how the
And
conversation goes, and we come
I
together.
think, yeah, and I think that's where people get lost, right? You don't have to agree with me or adopt my opinions to respect me.
Yes.
And that, I think, is kind of the missing issue here is respect. Respect for other people's opinions, respect for other people's experiences. Not, you are one person, I'm one person. So your story might not ring true to another person, and that's okay, right? But having respect for that and hearing that, and then seeing where you come together. It's like the man you were talking about on the video game, right? You were here and now you're here. And each conversation moves you closer. And it doesn't mean you're going to be best friends and hang out and,
Right.
go on vacation with your families together. But it does mean that each conversation raises a new awareness, and we become better through our learning, through our awareness, by expanding our interactions with people from all backgrounds.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
So
go for it.
yeah, so as a white female, how do you feel as far as the history, of what's taken place with race relations in our country? How do you feel?
It's really interesting. I have so many experiences with this in different ways. When we were talking about your post, I thought about my Peaceful Leaders one. It was well received on LinkedIn, well received on Facebook. On LinkedIn, I was told, as a white woman, you need to get in line and basically shut your mouth. Like, you don't know this issue. This is not your issue. And I felt I understood. Like, I have empathy and compassion for where those people were coming from. But it was hard for me because it made me feel again like, what did I do wrong? Where was I incorrect? I don't want to offend anyone, but sometimes when you don't want to offend anyone, you end up offending everyone. And so it's been an interesting journey for me. I grew up in Iowa, middle of America, similar to you, very, very white world. Like Iowa, I think at the time, and maybe still is, like 93% Caucasian. I went to a high school, we maybe had 10 Black people in my high school. Maybe I'm wrong there, but it was interesting because for me, it was never an issue. I never saw it that way. But as I got older and it got into like the dating world, and you start having these conversations like with my Black male friends, and they're like, well, if you were in a relationship with me, this is how it'd be perceived. This is how the Black community would perceive it. This is how the white community would perceive it. Are you ready for this? And it's like, those things didn't even occur to me because I was naive. I didn't even realize, because I was accepting, and I don't see people based on their color. Like, I don't judge people based on that. It was crazy for me to get inside the head from the other perspective, right? To see that. And it really hit me when I moved to South Carolina. I moved there when I was 21 years old, a nice third grade school teacher. I went to an area that was very rural in South Carolina, and one of my jobs was to teach South Carolina history. And all of you Civil War buffs know that it was not the Civil War to those people, the people, see, now I'm making a stereotype. The people of South Carolina, very much, some people still we're calling it the War of Northern Aggression. And I was like, who wrote these South Carolina history books? Like, what is this? They were still teaching Dixie, because that's the South Carolina theme song. I'm like, I grew up north. That is super racist. I can't teach kids this song. Like, why are we even talking about the Confederate flag? Like, that's not okay. But I realized that was all the way I was raised, right? My awareness, and it wasn't theirs. And so I was kind of hit in the face with that, as far as different people's perspectives and how there's a lot of racism in the white community. And I don't want to accuse anyone of being prejudiced or racist, but I'm shocked by the things that I will hear. And back then I didn't question it a lot, but with my third grade students, I did. There was a young man, when we were talking about the Civil War and all of the reasons that it happened, and he stood up. He actually stood up. I don't know why he stood up, but he said, my daddy still doesn't believe that these Black kids should be in school with us. And I'm like, yeah, like, I can't believe this 8-year-old just said this. And you should have seen the Black kids in my class just kind of shrink. Like, they clearly had been exposed to this before, but I hadn't, because I was this very naive Northern girl that didn't know what this community was like. I didn't know. And so I remember looking at him, and I said his name, which I won't say here. And I said, well, how do you feel about it? And so that was my way of saying, regardless of the stereotypes, the prejudices, the racism that goes on in your houses, you children have your own opinions. And he said, well, I think it's just fine. And I'm like, okay, well, that's all that matters. And he sat down and we just kept going. But it stuck with me. That was over 20 years ago. It stuck with me because it shocked me, because I didn't grow up in the South. And I do think there is more racism, outward racism, like people being verbal about it in the South than where I grew up in Iowa. It's hard for me as a white woman to know what's right, to not be offensive, because I would never want to offend anyone, but yet it's one of the reasons I'm here. I'm like, hey, Dr. Charlie, like, tell me how to be. How can I be a voice of change and peaceful leadership and guide my clients and all the people in my audience to be more aware without sounding ignorant or stupid? And you know what? I've let that go, right? I've let go. I might come off and people might judge me a certain way, and there's a bigger issue. So if people judge me and people, have things to say about me, that's their choice, that's on them. But for me, this issue is too big to just stay silent.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's too big to stay silent. And the same thing, this video, someone, well, he made this statement, therefore, write the whole thing off and view this statement with some evil intent. And there's absolutely no evil intent. The intent is to unify people.
Right.
And like-minded people will recognize that right away and gravitate towards it. That's how I see it. And I really have got to focus on the positives. I just don't have time for that negativity. Life's too short, and I'm not going to get pulled into any of those back and forth negativity games. And that's it. And so I think that we just have such a huge opportunity because people are wanting to know.
Right.
I made that video. I heard from people that I haven't spoken to in 40 years.
Wow.
Really supportive. Hey, I didn't know.
Yeah.
What can I do? I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, because it needs to be said. And we need people speaking calmly about these issues. And
Yeah.
so when we're calm, people will actually listen to us. But when we're poking
Right.
people in the chest or putting our finger in
Right.
someone's face, that's really going to widen the gap, not narrow the gap. The whole point is to narrow the gap right now between people and come to that common ground where we can really
Yeah.
operate and collaborate. So and it's exciting when it happens, and but it all, whether it's a friendship, an intimate relationship, whatever, even a business relationship, it all starts with conversation, right?
Yeah.
It all starts with conversation, and then it grows from there.
Right.
And when we don't have conversations, people naturally tend to
Right.
separate apart because there's all these assumptions and misunderstandings, and there's no ability to have clarification without conversation.
Yeah. And that's where I think I was coming from, like when I was sharing some of my experiences just now of being a white woman in the world and wanting to have a voice here, but also knowing that I haven't experienced the things that Black people in America have experienced. I haven't gone through that. And so there is a fear on my part of backlash, of people being like, get in line, this is not your issue. But yet, if I don't raise this issue, what if we all do that and then it stays the same? What if the entire white community is like, I'm afraid of this issue. I don't want to step on anyone's toes. I don't want to, have a backlash on my business or my family for something I might say. If we do that and we shrink back in fear, nothing's ever going to change.
100%. And that's really one of the challenges, one of the issues is people, we have a culture of trying to get people to get in line, get in line. That's
Yeah.
not your place to say that. Well, whose place is it to say,
Yeah.
right? I was watching a broadcast on ESPN, and it was a panel of a couple of journalists and a couple of athletes, and it was Jalen Rose was talking passionately about this stuff, and he's saying that, hey, there's been a question on whether athletes should be outspoken and even weighing in
Right.
on these issues. He says, well, I guess so, because no one else is. That's what he said. I guess so, because no one else is doing it. And I was like, that's me. And so my strategy for years has been to be a great example for Black kids coming up, but
Yeah.
not just Black kids, for any kid coming up, to be
Right.
an example, someone that they can look up to. And then understanding, and I had a Black man pull me aside. He was close to retirement when he heard me speak, and he pulled me aside and he says, hey, can I give you some advice? I said, absolutely. And he said, I'm not trying to tell you your business, but he said, I don't think you understand how important what you're doing is. He says, you're smart, articulate, you have a way with words, your voice, you're in a suit, you're highly educated. He said, people are seeing a side of the African American community that they don't get a chance to see on television.
Right.
Okay, you're live and in person. And he said, this is how change happens. Because all these people are going to go home and they're going to go, that was different, right?
Yeah.
And if it's in conflict with what they've been led to believe or taught to believe or come to believe, it creates that question in their mind,
Right.
and in a good way. And so that's been my approach, is that, hey, that I'm going to shatter all these stereotypes, right?
Absolutely.
That are out there. I'm going to shatter them. So people say, well, no, there was this one man, right? I remember him, this bald-headed Black man, came to our company and talked. It was awesome. And I can see the audience change a lot of times when I'm talking, because I have a lot of clients in rural locations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can see the audience change, that maybe the first 10 minutes in, 15 minutes in, there's a Black man in front of the room speaking. And then about 15 minutes in, it's a businessman.
Mhm.
a fellow human
Yes.
in front of the room.
Yes.
And so that's been my strategy and approach for years. And so nothing wrong with that. However, I see now it's important to be more out front and
Mm.
more vocal in a positive way, because I think the loudest people in certain instances are the last people that should be the loudest, right?
Right.
They're
Right.
shouting,
And that's what the news capitalizes on,
right?
right? The news loves drama. They're in the entertainment business. They will say they're not, but they are. And so, what sells news stories? Drama. So, the more dramatic, the better. So, a discussion on solutions, on peace, it's not very exciting. So what do they focus on instead? Oh, look, this Wendy's in Atlanta just got burnt down. And why did it get burnt down? Because this happened and this, now we're this, and now we're dividing again, always dividing. It's like, whew, okay, here's another situation. What happened here? How are people feeling about it? Let's open the dialogue.
Yes. And so I love that you brought that up, because it's true. The news media is fueling the negative side of it. And this is a principle I teach to leaders all over the country. I call it consistent intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what that means is they have an employee and they make a mistake. Okay. And so they get after them and, hey, this is unacceptable. It's not how we do business, whatever the case may be. But my challenge to them is, I said, when that employee does the right thing, do you come at them with the same level of intensity as you did
Wow.
a mistake? So I expect consistent intensity. Well, if you practice consistent intensity, you're going to be patting them on the back and high-fiving them a lot more often than you're going to have to get after them. And in the case where if you do have to get after them, you've built up enough emotional capital in that emotional bank account.
Yes.
You're like, okay, yeah, I made a mistake, boss. I'll fix it. Okay. So with the news media, there's no consistent intensity, right? It's intense coverage on all the negative, and then the positive is ignored, which is
Right.
most part. I mean, if
Right.
I look out the window to this office right now, there's birds flying out there, there's rabbits hopping around, there's nothing going on. Okay,
Right.
it's just peaceful. Most of America, if you open your blinds right now and look out the window, it's peaceful. Look out your car windows right now. It's
Yeah.
That's not being covered. This microcosm is blown up. So I've got a friend living in Toronto. They think the whole place is burning down,
Oh
because that's
yeah.
all they see. Man, is your city on fire? No.
Yeah.
What's going on? Are like that's the portrayal from the media.
Right.
So we have an opportunity to, not only with these relations, to improve that, but I think there has to be some accountability with how things are being reported.
Right.
There has to be accountability with that. And I think the news media has an important place in our society, but right now they're doing far more damage than they're helping. I don't think anyone would argue that. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so hard again, because it's like, I get that that's their job, but it is ironic that in a 30-minute news show, they actually have like feel good sections of the news. It's like, here's our 30 seconds of feel good. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's so unproportional of what's really happening. And yeah, I have clients, colleagues, and friends in Europe when all of the things were happening a few years ago, like the kind of white supremacist marches and all of those things were happening around the election time. People were like, oh my gosh, what's happening in America? Like, and I'm like, okay, those are terrible instances that are happening, but they're not happening in every city. They're happening in a few cities, which is horrible, but America hasn't just completely gone crazy. But they see that, right? Like, I get messages on LinkedIn all the time, like, "Are you safe?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah. Why would I? Why would I not be safe? Because it looks like America's burning down."
mhm.
And a lot of those protests were peaceful. But what gets news coverage? Someone slamming in a storefront, looting, burning down the Wendy's. That gets news attention, not the peaceful leaders, not the people that I was creating my post about, right? They don't get attention. Martin Luther King Jr. did an amazing thing because he knew with consistency you can accomplish things. So he quietly kept going and going and going until he got his Million Man March, right? Until he got all of those people to be together for a peaceful movement. And I think that, for me, that's what I'm seeking right now, is where is that movement? Where are all the people that want to align and say enough is enough? This has gone on for basically all of American history.
Oh, so I've got a couple of quotes to end this segment on.
Yeah.
I think are really fitting. So, and I've been doing some research over the last several weeks with all this. And Martin Luther King said that the only thing that can make your enemy your friend is love. He said it's the only force powerful enough, right? Well, then you pull it back to Abraham Lincoln. After the Civil War, he was giving a speech. He was talking about the United States and unity. And there was a woman in the audience questioning him about that, about embracing people from the South. Aren't they our enemy?
Yeah.
Aren't they our enemies? And he said, Madam, if I make my enemies my friends, are not my enemies destroyed? Are they not destroyed?
Wow.
It's
That's
incredible.
so powerful.
Right? Incredible. So then let's take it back another 1,000 years to Sun Tzu, The Art of War. It's this amazing book. It's thick, all these strategies of combat and war. But he said the supreme art of war is winning without fighting.
Mm.
So
Yes.
you've got some of the greatest leaders in history, and the theme is very common, right? It's a very common thread. So I think that's a great place to end. And once again, Julie, this has been awesome, and I so appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dr. Charlie. I really appreciate you being open to these discussions of raising awareness and kind of peeling back the layers and looking at where we can start constructive dialogue. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you.